The Force Awakens was almost a radically different movie, featuring Darth Maul's triumphant return as the main villain, Darth Talon as his deadly apprentice, Luke Skywalker taking center stage for much of the story, and the death of Poe Dameron. So let's dive in and take a look at what happened behind the scenes to arrive at the movie we got, and also take a look at what could have been Star Wars The Force Awakens. In a 1983 interview, Mark Hamill shared that George Lucas asked him if he'd be open to playing an older, Obi-Wan-like version of Luke Skywalker in Episode 7, who hands Excalibur down to the next generation. When Mark Hamill asked Lucas when the movie would be made, Lucas responded with sometime around 2011. Nearly 3 decades later, in 2012, Lucas invited Hamill and Carrie Fisher to lunch, to tell them he was handing over control of Lucasfilm to Kathleen Kennedy, to oversee production of Episodes 7, 8, and 9, after his plans for a Star Wars TV series called Underworld fell through. Lucas informed Hamill and Fisher that he wouldn't be directing the films, but assured them that while he wanted them involved, their roles wouldn't be recast if they declined. Instead, their characters would simply be written out. Fisher immediately agreed, but Hamill hesitated, as he was skeptical that they could recapture the magic of the original trilogy, and doubted Harrison Ford, who had openly expressed his disdain for Han Solo over the years, would return. Not only that, but Hamill felt the story had been told, saying there was a beginning, a middle, and an end, and they all lived happily ever after, and that's the way it should be. Hamill would leave the meeting telling Lucas he'd think about it. However, he was stunned to later learn that Disney had purchased Lucasfilm, and that Harrison Ford had agreed to return to the role that made him famous, contingent on a huge payday, and Disney's promise to produce another Indiana Jones film, which was part of the sale to Disney. Feeling a sense of obligation and worried that fans would never forgive him if he passed, Hamill agreed to return as Luke Skywalker against his better judgment. Part of the sale to Disney included Lucas' story treatments for Episodes 7, 8, and 9, and while some of his ideas would make it into the Disney versions of the films, other ideas would be ignored entirely. Similar to how the original trilogy was influenced by Lucas' strong opposition to the Vietnam War, with the Empire representing America and the Rebels representing Vietnam, the sequels would have drawn inspiration from the aftermath of the Iraq War. As the New Republic attempts to assert control following the fall of the Empire, the films would have explored the challenges of post-war reconstruction, while the galaxy struggles with chaos and lawlessness. The stormtroopers would have been like Saddam Hussein's Ba'athist fighters that joined ISIS and kept on fighting, and they would refuse to give up when the Republic won. Darth Maul, however, would have returned to rally these fractured remnants of the Empire, while uniting the criminal underworld against the New Republic, with the core of the conflict being the New Republic trying to get the galaxy under control from Maul and his gangsters. Considering Maul would have been old and relying on metal legs to walk, he would have left the fighting to his new apprentice Darth Talon, who would go on to literally seduce Han and Leia's son Skylar to the dark side, with Episode 7 focusing on his fall. For his part, Luke Skywalker would have been trying to restart the Jedi from scratch, but after Skylar betrays him, Luke would have gone into self-imposed exile, which Luke is based on Colonel Kurtz from Apocalypse Now. It's important to note that this was Lucas's idea, and it predated both J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson coming aboard. A young female character who Lucas named Thea seeks out Luke Skywalker with the help of Han Solo to learn the ways of the Force after her home is destroyed by Darth Talon. Leia would have been the one trying to rebuild the Republic as they try to get it under control from Maul and his gangsters. By the end of the trilogy, she would have reformed the Republic and become the Supreme Chancellor in charge of everything, while Luke would have trained her in the ways of the Force before dying in Episode 9, after having rebuilt much of the Jedi, with Leia being revealed as the actual Chosen One. Lucas and Kathleen Kennedy would hire Michael Arndt, who won an Oscar for Little Miss Sunshine, to write the entire sequel trilogy, not just Episode 7. And while he worked with Lucas to realize his vision, once Disney purchased Lucasfilm, they decided they didn't want to go in that direction. So the mandate was to start from scratch, even though many of George's ideas evolved and found their way into the final film. For example, Darth Maul would morph into a new character named Uber, before morphing again into Snoke. Darth Talon, who would have been a Jedi hunter, and Han and Leia's son would merge into one character, Kylo Ren, with his fall to the dark side happening off-screen before Episode 7, instead of during the film like Lucas had planned. George's vision was always about a young woman on her quest to become a Jedi Knight. From the beginning, Arndt wanted her to be a scavenger and loner. He saw her as a hothead, gear-headed badass, and the ultimate outsider and disenfranchised person, because that person has the longest journey. Originally, Arndt had Rey's home destroyed before she goes on the road to meet Luke, where she's trained by the Jedi Master before confronting the bad guy. But Arndt felt that every time Luke entered the movie, he just took it over, and suddenly you didn't care about Rey anymore. As a result, they decided to make Luke himself the MacGuffin and save him for the end of the film. Mark Hamill would be devastated to learn that he was basically cut out of the movie, and worried that Luke's big reveal at the end of the movie would fall flat and potentially reek as a cheap gimmick. However, some of the early MacGuffins for the movie were first search for Darth Vader's remains, since Kylo wanted to take on the persona of Vader in order to haunt Luke and seek revenge over his former master wounding him after Kylo betrayed him, as well as a quest to the underwater wreckage of the second Death Star, to recover a piece of history about sacred Jedi sites in the galaxy. In this version, the end of the film would have seen Rey find a hidden map inside the Emperor's Tower of the second Death Star, which tells her the location of the first Jedi temple where Luke is hiding. Obviously, some of these ideas would be repurposed for Episode 9. Arndt also allegedly developed a plot point of having Leia's true parentage revealed to the Senate, destroying her political credibility and undermining her nomination for first senator. Han Solo dying was also something that was pitched to Harrison Ford by Lucas early on, but was a plot point that remained in flux. Arndt had thought that the Han and Leia story was just about them coming back together after separating between Episodes 6 and 7, and at the end of the movie they would have reconciled and got over their differences. It wasn't until J.J. Abrams came aboard as director that he felt Han wasn't really pushing the story forward, and suggested that Kylo kill him, which is what Lawrence Kasdan wanted to do all the way back in Return of the Jedi. The male lead was also a character Arndt struggled to figure out. At one point, Arndt considered making him a pirate and a merchant marine. Lucas saw him as someone with pure charisma, and early concept art not only shows him as white, but also heavily influenced by Han Solo. It would be Lawrence Kasdan who would eventually suggest making him a former stormtrooper. However, Arndt struggled to complete the script, and after Lucas's story treatments were set aside, a writer's room was established that included Arndt, Kiri Hart, Lawrence Kasdan, who wrote Empire Jedi, Kathleen Kennedy, and Simon Kinberg. According to Kasdan, the sessions went on for months, with little progress, as they struggled to crack the story. Eager to get the project back on track, Kennedy looked to hire a director. The Incredibles' Brad Bird was reportedly a top choice, but he was busy directing Tomorrowland. Joss Whedon, who had just directed The Avengers, was very eager to do it, but was contracted to do Age of Ultron, leading to what he called a moment of rue. Eventually, J.J. Abrams would be hired at Steven Spielberg's suggestion. Abrams was already known for his signature mystery box storytelling approach, a technique where he thrust the audience into an unfolding mystery to ignite their curiosity and drive the narrative forward. This approach drives the audience's desire for answers to the mysteries presented, while generating intrigue and providing writers with numerous narrative threads to develop. However, Abrams also had a reputation for leaving many of these questions unanswered, or resolving them in unsatisfying ways, largely because he often didn't have the answers when the mysteries were first thought up. A prime example is the TV show Lost, which he co-created, where many of the island's mysteries were devised on the fly, with explanations only conceived near the series' end. Similarly, in Mission Impossible 3, the Rabbit's Foot remains a vague MacGuffin, with its purpose and nature never fully explained. When Abrams officially signed on to direct Episode 7, Arndt had been working on the script for several months, but said he needed 18 more, which was more time than Disney was willing to give him. From Disney's perspective, they had just purchased Lucasfilm for $4 billion, and their shareholders eagerly wanted a return on that investment. When Abrams asked Disney to push back Episode 7's release date so that they could have more time to work on the script, Disney refused. Around this time, Abrams, Kennedy, and Michael Arndt also met with Lucas to discuss their ideas for the film, but as they began to describe the plot, Lucas immediately got upset, as it dawned on him that they weren't sticking to his story treatments, resulting in Lucas distancing himself from the creative process. And with Michael Arndt unable to move any faster, the decision was made to let him go, so that Abrams and Kasdan could take over and pump out a script as fast as possible to meet Disney's release date. However, their original version of the script also had several key differences to the finished film. For starters, the opening of the film was completely different. Originally, the film mirrored the opening of Episode 4, with a massive Star Destroyer flying overhead, only for it to be revealed that it's being towed before being dropped into the atmosphere of Jakku as scrap. Jakku also wasn't a desert planet like Tatooine, but just a planet used for Imperial scrap. Another version of this opening that was considered featured Luke's severed hand clutching his iconic blue lightsaber floating through space, before it enters Jakku's atmosphere as Luke's hand burns up. However, the lightsaber would survive and fall to the planet below, where it would have been picked up by an alien hand, possibly Maz's. It's also rumored that Rey would have come into possession of the lightsaber much earlier in the film and sought out Han Solo to help her find Luke and return it to him. Rey and Finn would have found Solo as a down-and-out drunk in a bar, separated from Leia. As for Maz, originally she was supposed to follow everyone to the Resistance base, but Abrams cut her out of the third act because he thought she didn't do anything useful except sit around. This is the same reason Lucas killed off Obi-Wan in Episode 4, because he originally did nothing in the third act but sit around the Rebel base during the Death Star trench run. Poe Dameron was originally envisioned as a minor character, who would only have appeared in the first act, ultimately dying during the TIE fighter crash on Jakku, which Finn survives. His character went through numerous iterations too. At one point he was a Jedi, then he was a bounty hunter with a Wookiee sidekick, before finally being turned into a pilot. Poe was also originally envisioned as black, while Finn was envisioned as white. After Abrams cast Oscar Isaac, he liked the actor so much that he decided not to kill him off, and make him the third lead of the film. film, echoing the trio of Han, Luke, and Leia from the original trilogy. And while it was Spielberg who suggested Abrams for the job, he's also the one who suggested Abrams add a jump scare explosion after the TIE fighter is sucked into the sand. Spielberg also suggested that trees should be falling during the lightsaber duel between Kylo and Rey. However, it was Selma director Ava DuVernay who suggested that Rey should pause for a moment, close her eyes, and think back to what she learned from Maz, as she lets the Force come to her. Originally, Rey just calls Kylo a monster before pushing back, but this moment of self-reflection not only connected with the title of the film, The Force Awakens, but ended up being the turning point in the duel. One idea that never made it into the final film was a Resistance superweapon called the Warhammer that would have been several times the size of a Star Destroyer and took the form of a massive ship with a huge front that could penetrate a planetary shield and then deploy ships through it. The Resistance would have used this weapon, which went through several different designs, during the attack on Starkiller Base. Snoke at one point was envisioned as a female, as Abrams had reservations about making the character old and decrepit like the Emperor, even though he'd ultimately go in that direction. When Rian Johnson elected to kill the character off in Last Jedi, Abrams apparently laughed when he first read that scene in the script. Early drafts of the film would have clarified why a group like the Resistance existed despite the re-establishment of the Republic. It would have been revealed that the New Republic had significantly reduced its military strength, believing the Empire no longer posed a threat. However, when Leia's warnings about the growing threat of the remnants of the Empire went unheeded, she formed the Resistance to monitor and counter the rising threat of the First Order. Captain Phasma grew out of a rejected design for Kylo Ren, when he was seen as the Lord of the Stormtroopers, in bright, shining silver armor. Originally, though, the character was male, with Benedict Cumberbatch eyed for the part. However, after some backlash online over how few women were in the cast, Abrams and Kasdan decided to switch Phasma's gender to female to help balance things out. The ending to the film was also slightly changed, as it originally featured Rey finding Luke meditating while lifting rocks with the Force. However, Rian Johnson requested that the rocks be removed to align with his script for The Last Jedi, which saw Luke disconnected from the Force. When The Force Awakens was finally released, Lucas didn't hide his disappointment, saying Disney wanted to do a retro movie and there was nothing new in it. He would go on to say that with each movie he worked hard to make them different, with new planets and spaceships, and that there weren't enough visual or technical leaps forward in The Force Awakens. And that's a shame, because before Lucas sold Lucasfilm to Disney, he was planning an ambitious television series called Underworld that would have pushed not only the Star Wars universe forward, but filmmaking technology as well. Ultimately, it would never happen, and the scripts to this series would not only form part of the sale to Disney, but be plundered, with many of their ideas showing up in Disney's movies and shows, just like with The Force Awakens, which, while not exactly following Lucas' sequel trilogy treatments, still used many of his ideas. And if you'd like to see our video on Star Wars Underworld and what that would have been like, click the link on the end screen coming right up. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Bullets and Blockbusters for more great content.